Good evening and welcome to Africa's Vision Network. Africa's Vision Network features African cultural awareness, education, economic empowerment, and other issues focusing on the African world. I am Princess Ayo, your host for the show. And we have an exciting show this evening for you with two amazing talents. The title of our show today is The Direction of Black Literature, and we have two black men with us who are going to tell us all about black literature and what's going on with it. So I welcome you into the show. One of our guests is Kwame Alexander, and Kwame is a poet, stage director, producer, playwright, editor, and publisher. And Kwame is a pivotal figure in the current renaissance of black literature and performance. He holds a degree in psychology, English, and black studies from Virginia Tech, right here in Virginia with us, where he studied for 3 years under the renowned Nikki Giovanni, who I admired all the way from Nigeria when I would read her poems. Kwame is the CEO and founder of Black Words, Inc., an independent publishing house dedicated to providing publishing opportunities for the many talented literary voices of the hip-hop generation. And he has written and directed and produced several screenplays. He is the author of 3 books of poetry. Welcome, Kwame.
Well, thank you. Good to be here.
We also have Omar Rashid Tyree, who caused my 17-year-old daughter to scream when I told her I was going to interview him today. And Omar is a journalist, lecturer, activist, poet, and author of 7 novels, who completed his undergraduate studies at Howard University with honors in print journalism. While attending the University of Pittsburgh and studying to become a pharmacist, he discovered an uncanny ability to write. And after graduating from Howard, he served as a reporter and an assistant editor at the Capital Spotlight newspaper, and also a chief reporter for News Dimensions in Washington, D.C. Welcome.
All right.
We're excited to have you here today. And you know, my viewers know how, well, I'm a storyteller, so they know I love literature, I love stories.
Well, you said that we're going to have an exciting show, and then you said literature. I didn't think the same.
See,
literature
I
and
was
exciting.
an English teacher before I became a storyteller.
We
So
better,
to
we
me,
better excite this thing up then, boy, because, you know, yeah, those two things aren't supposed to go together.
They're not supposed to, but we know better, right?
Yeah, we do. We know better.
We know what's really happening.
Right on.
I want to start with Kwame. Mr. Alexander, sir.
Yes.
Please share with our viewers something about yourself and your career. I'm going to get nosy now. How did you start with this writing thing?
Wow. I started writing poetry age 12. It was Mother's Day.
Wow.
And I didn't have any money. I had $3.85. And so I decided I was going to go to People's Drugstore, which is now called CVS.
Okay, yes, I remember.
I was going to go to People's Drugstore and get a frame.
Okay.
And I was going to put a picture in it of myself and give it to my mother for Mother's Day, and figured, well, why don't I write her a poem? So I wrote her a poem called Mother's Day. Put it in the frame. She loved it. And I said, well, maybe I got something here.
Yes.
And started writing, and proceeded to write on into high school and then at college. And actually, both my parents are writers.
Yeah, he has pedigree over here.
Yeah, so both my parents are writers. And, you know, growing up, my father had 16 books that he had written. And it just took so much for me to read those books. I mean, we didn't want to read them. Me and my sisters didn't want to read. We don't read your books, you know. But you know, we got through it, and they had some serious impact on my direction and my future as a writer. So that was sort of, you know, the first way that I got started.
And of course, it's one thing to be a writer and another one to get into the career in literary and publishing, in the publishing world.
Right.
So how did that interest start?
Well, being at school with Nikki Giovanni and writing a lot of poetry, and then coming out of school and wanting to get my poetry published, and realizing that for the most part, the major houses don't publish poetry, and they very seldom publish white poets, which means that they even less seldom publish black poets. And so it became a decision of mine that if I was going to be published as a poet, I was going to have to publish myself. And that was around the time that I actually met Omar, when he had already self-published a book called Colored on White Campus, now called Battle Zone. And I decided I was going to go ahead and publish my poetry. So we published a poetry book in '94. It did pretty well, published 2 poetry books in '95, and then realized, okay, we can sell 2,000 to 3,000 copies, but I want to sell tens of thousands of copies like my buddy over here. So maybe I need to publish a novel. And so we kind of transitioned into publishing novels. Wow. And that showed us that the real money in publishing at that point in time, and even on up to the present day, and I'm sure we'll get to this because it's a commentary on where we are, but the real revenue is generated by commercial fiction, particularly when it comes to the black community. Wow. And so that's what a lot of the sisters are reading. That's what a lot of the publishers are publishing when you talk about black writers. And so we started publishing fiction, and from there we started publishing mysteries, and so it just kind of just. Now,
did your parents help you with that decision?
Oh no, my father, who also is a publisher.
Okay, he told you to go on your own.
Yeah,
right?
he I worked for him, and he didn't want to publish poetry either. And so I had to quit
you said
working
no?
with my father. He said no. And so he never liked publishing fiction. In fact, he maybe published one novel in all of his tenure in publishing. But he didn't like the idea of me publishing fiction, especially dabbing my hands into commercial fiction. He thought it was trash, quote, trash. And so he didn't want me publishing fiction. But, they've been very supportive. He gave me the money to start the company. Oh, right. They've been very supportive. Oh, cool. And as we move more into publishing mysteries and literary fiction, they begin to establish a different level of interest in what we're doing. And the name of the company is Black Words, by the way. Words. So that's sort of how I moved into publishing.
Okay. And I discovered there's a write-up about you. There was a write-up about you in the Washington Post about the premiere of your latest play.
Oh, yeah.
So tell us about that. How do you feel about that and your plays? Well,
aside from publishing, as I said, my first love was writing. I kind of backed into publishing because the opportunities just weren't there. And, for every Terry McMillan, there are hundreds of younger writers out there who are writing, who have the potential to be, have that magnitude in terms of literature. And so that was my goal for starting the company. But my first love is writing, writing poetry and writing plays. And so I finally got the opportunity to finish a play last year that I'd been working on for 2 years, and that was a play about Tupac Shakur called The Seventh Son. And it was a joy. It was a painful process to write, and it was a joy to finish the project, and it was an even better joy to get some funding from Arlington County to produce the play. Wow. Theater is very difficult, just like poetry. It has that sort of alternative artistic edge to it, and you really have to have grants. Right. You really have to have some ties to professional theaters, and we were lucky to get some funding and some grants from Arlington County to put on the play. The play deals with the double consciousness that I thought that Tupac embodied. Just how can he say and do things in one song that people have a very definitive problem with, and then another song say and do things that are completely different and completely, extremely on the opposite end. Right. And so I looked at that on a very simplistic level, and then also looked at an experience I had with Tupac in Charleston, South Carolina, where I spent the weekend with him. Wow. And I actually got to see this in person. I got to see this dichotomy, these two sides of this young brother, these warring ideals.
Oh, he's a Gemini, though.
Exactly.
Is he?
Gemini.
And Omar, you saw the play.
Yeah, the play was awesome.
Wow.
Yeah.
So where is it showing? Where can people
it's about to be staged. It was staged originally in Roslyn, and it's about to be staged in Baltimore. Okay. And then it'll be going on a tour to about 7 cities around the country. Okay. And we hope that people will get some insight, which is why I wrote it, some insight into who this brother really was.
Yeah. I'll try to get him down south too. Yeah.
Yeah, the potential that he had, and how there are thousands of other young brothers like Tupac.
Like him, yeah. Amazing, very interesting. Omar, it's your turn.
My turn.
Your turn. I want you to share some of yourself with us, your career.
Well, Kwame said his first love was writing. My first love was watching movies. Okay. So my whole story thing comes from film. And so a lot of people ask me, well, I bet you read a whole lot of books. Nah, I didn't read any books. I was outside playing and running with the boys. I was a hardhead. I was in Philadelphia running the streets. But I could sit down and watch movies for about 8 straight hours. you know, and then I'd walk away and have whole lines memorized and characters memorized. So once it got to the point where I got to college and we had to do English assignments in which we had to write what I call free-flowing assignments, where we weren't writing about something we had to read. They just gave you assignments where they wanted you to write about your family and your neighborhood and your friends or something that changed your life.
What you did for summer.
Yeah, it was open stuff. So once it got to that point, I said, well, let me sit down and, you know, figure out how to do this thing. And then that's when all that movie watching came into play, because I knew how to break down characters and scenery and why they did things and all that, the human psychology. I was on point with it. And then dialogue, it just came natural to me. So then I started reading in front of the classroom. They were like, man, your stuff is great. And then I ended up getting an A in English. You know, they always pass you into different levels of English. So I got into the highest level of English, and I had never been an English person. I was always a math and science guy. So once it got to that point, I said, well, like Kwame said, I must have something here.
Yes.
But for me, it was much later. I think I was about 18, 19. Okay. You know, and that's when I started thinking about putting together long-ended stories. You know, and at that time, you know, I was asking professors, how come young people don't write, you know, novels and what have you? And he said, basically, I guess they don't have nothing to say. You know, they don't have enough. And with me being a guy that ran the streets, I said, man, I had plenty of stuff
He shouldn't have said that to you, right?
Yeah, so I went ahead and started putting my first book together at 19, you know, Colored on White Campus, and then Fly Girl. I wrote both of those at 19, but I had to hold on to them until I, you know, finished college. You know, so as soon as I got out of school in 91, I got my company together in 92, and at the end of 92, I had that first book out, and that's when I met Kwame. I was hawking books, and we were both in the African-American Writers, what's that, Guild?
Guild.
Yeah, so you know, I came in there, and I was already trying to sell guys books, you know, we were still writing.
Now, how did you know at 19 to hold on to the book till you finished college? What?
Well, I put it on a disc, you know, and the Macintosh was like, and I still use Mac. Everybody said, you still use, look, I started with it, and it's a writing thing, you know, so yeah, I started off with the Mac, and they had those little floppy disks. Yeah, so I wasn't going to write it and throw it away. You know, I was a comic book collector later on in my life. You know, I started collecting movies, so, you know, with me being a collector, I'm not writing anything I'm going to throw away. I got old pieces of papers from 20 years ago. You know,
but like, why didn't you then say, find a publisher and say, I've got something?
Well, for me, I knew I was going to come back to it, you know, and I wasn't dying, you know, and you got people that they figure that if I don't do it right now, I'm going to die. Well, I knew I was only 19. I wasn't in a hurry, so I said, well, let me finish school first, and then I can come back to it. Then once I got back to it, like Kwame already said with his father, a lot of older statesmen in the African-American publishing industry look at this contemporary stuff as if it's valueless. And so since I was writing fiction, or at least that's what they call it, of course we always write about the reality. You know, we just change the face or the person, or, you know, that kind, or jazz it up, make it more dramatic to make a point. You know, the same thing you do in theater, the same thing you do in film, the same thing you do in music. You know, but they look at this, the older statesmen look at it as, oh, I'm not publishing that. So of course, you know, African World Press wouldn't publish it, Third World Press wouldn't publish it, Black Classics. So I said, look, I'm not going to be walking around knocking on doors, wearing out my knuckles. I'm going to go ahead and use the education that I got from Howard University in print journalism, get the money together and put it out myself. You know, so you're not looking at individuals who are going to wait around, you know, begging people.
And you started with being in pharmacy.
Right.
In Pittsburgh.
Well, my mother's a pharmacist.
Oh, okay.
You know, so my pedigree is on the math and science side. So some people say, well, where'd the writing come from? Again, it came from the film stuff. You know, I think I had sucked in so much from watching film that I just knew the ins and out of storytelling. No problem.
I wondered why Pittsburgh, now my brother went to Pittsburgh and got a master's there. So I just wondered that Pittsburgh and that move to Howard, what caused you to do that?
Well, every
like
weekend we used
black
to, as students at Pittsburgh, you know, we were like 5%.
Of course, that's what I'm thinking.
I mean, you know, like 3% were the athletes. You know, I actually went there and I was running track my freshman year. You know, and I just looked around at the politics of it. And every weekend, if we didn't have like some kind of event at our, you know, student function thing, we were just walking around campus. And the white students had clubs all up and down everywhere. They had all the fraternities and sororities. So every weekend we'd sit around and say, boy, I bet they're having a great time at Howard, and, you know, and Norfolk State and Hampton and all the black schools. But of course we didn't want to go there because we figured we were in a better place being with a white institution. So after a while I said, look, man, this is ridiculous. You know, we sitting in here every weekend with nothing to do. And then I'm in math and science classes where a lot of blacks were not in there. So I was basically like the only student in a lot of classrooms. You know, so I said, look, I'm tired of being lonely. And once it got to the point where I knew I was going to do the writing thing instead of the pharmacy thing, I said, well, let me go ahead and go to Howard, and, you know, and get around black people and see how, you know, the different atmosphere would be.
Okay. After you had started the writing, though, was there someone that influenced you?
Nah, not at all. People always ask me that. And they say, well, who was your inspiration? Nah, my whole thing was, if there's books out that we're buying and I know I can write, I'm going to write one too. You know, so I wasn't reading books. You know, so it's not a way. Yeah, Donald Goines, I started reading him later. I didn't start reading his work until like 92. You know, so my whole impetus when I was first starting out was that, look, his books on the market, people are writing them, I can write, I'm going to be one of them. Bottom line.
Now, tell us some of the themes for people who don't know. Like me, I didn't know anything about Omar Tyree before I was told to be a host on this show. What are the themes of your novels?
Well, in
your words, not what we put on you.
I'm journalistic, so that's why I tell people all the time, I try to look at issues. You know, like Kwame's father would say, oh, that stuff is... With me, I'm looking at an issue. I'm not going to write. A lot of authors say, well, I had this story in my head. You know, I'm not that kind of writer. Yeah, I'm going to look at society and say, what do we need to talk about right now? And then go in and use all the facilities that I know about human structure and then do some research sometimes and go ahead and put that book out. So the first one, of course, was me being on a white campus. There's plenty of black students that go on white campuses and lose their minds, you know, with all those struggles. So my first book, Colored on White Campus, dealt with that whole transformation of education when you get to college, because a lot of people don't make it to college, so they don't get that in-your-face thing that you get in college. Second book, Fly Girl, dealt with the materialism that, you know, the 1980s culture went through. I mean, we were the most materialistic culture that African America had ever produced. You know, and we spawned this hip-hop thing that's live now, and these 90s kids are into, and the suburb kids got into. So that was the second book. And then the third book, I wrote a book called Capital City, which when I came to D.C. at Howard, they called Capital City or Washington, D.C. the murder capital for 3 straight years. And I said, what in the world is going on here? Well, you do some research and you find out that Washington, D.C. and the Virginia area has the highest income of black Americans living in this country because of all the degrees that they had from Howard and then all the political people that come back to this area. So you find out that Maryland and Virginia has some very high income, and then when you have poor people mixed with that high income and some drug stuff comes around, everybody wants to get paid. You know, so I wrote a book about 3 young guys caught up in the drug trade of Washington, D.C. Then I got a contract with the big publishing guys, and, you know, everybody was looking for that next male Terry McMillan figure. And I wasn't going to write no bad books about men. You know, I was a man. And I was around plenty of guys who were good guys that couldn't get any dates. You know how women, well, he's too nice for me, you know. So I wrote a book about one of those good guys that we often ignore, a do-right man.
Yeah, that's the one I'm reading now.
Yeah, and then after that, I looked around again and said, what's another book that we need for the community? We have far too many single moms floating around in America. So I said, this is another problem. We need to discuss fatherhood. But since we don't have any brothers reading books, because they have the same attitude that Kwame's father has, it's a waste of my time, you know, that kind of things, particularly if it's called fiction. I said, well, I can't call it fatherhood, daddy come home, or anything like that. So I called it single mom because everything's gravitating around the mom anyway. But I dealt with 3 men, 2 guys that walked away from this mother with the kid, and then the third guy that's thinking about taking her on after she has 2 kids and her own degree, and now she's become this superwoman that we had to deal with all the time now because black women have had to do all the work. You know, and so that was the next book. And in the meantime, I wasn't getting much media play from any of these books. And they were all issue-based books. So I became the bad guy. So I started getting mad and telling people off and whatnot because I wasn't smiley and happy talking about numbers anymore. I was talking about how come this book isn't soldiered on every media outlet because these are serious problems in our community. So the last book, Sweet St. Louis, is one that you have on the table today. I noticed that with this whole single mom thing and the do-right man and all these relationship books, we don't have that old-fashioned love and commitment between the black man and the black woman. So I said we need an old-fashioned book that just deals with 2 regular working people. One thing I noticed with a lot of the sister fiction, on page 1, they're talking about this guy calling him from the IBM studio on the 40th floor, and he's going to have his yacht. And I said, no, we're getting into this money stuff, and it's not about the money. It's about the man and woman enjoying everything they have to offer each other. So I came out with Sweet St. Louis. You know, so again, my books have all purpose to them, but and this time with the media, if you don't sell 1 million copies, they don't care. You know, so I've been the rabble rouser and being mad for the last, you know, 3-4 years. Kwame is
angry.
Yeah, but he's smiling.
He's angry.
He looks happy.
I'm smiling now. I said, look, I'm just going to love my family and the people who get the work I'm trying to do, great. But I can't kill myself, you know, worrying about trying to get every person.
Well, people are appreciating it. I have a daughter, like I said, who does not read.
Right.
And she read your book.
Right.
And then I went on the internet and there was a write-up about a woman who was a librarian in a prison.
Yeah.
And how the female prisoners she would bring in a set of books and they would take them all, and she'd have to wait for the next shipment. So people are reading it. We're going to get into a discussion about black literature, but before I do, because I know the book really is seems to talk to a lot of young people, and of course you guys are young. Explain to us what hip-hop is.
And Kwame can jump right on that.
Yeah.
I know Kwame
he already threatened me
he probably
earlier.
About a poem
he threatened me that he was going to talk. Yeah, he'd tell me something. Okay, tell me, what is it?
What is hip hop? Well, that's a whole nother show, Princess.
I understand.
It's it's a lot of things, and briefly, hip hop is about a way of dress. It's about a way of a language. It's about a music. It's about a generation of people who spawned from the black arts, from the Black Power movement, who were born in the late '60s and the '70s, and who had to try to deal with the racist regimes in this country while their parents had jobs and had given up this movement, or who were forced out of it, whether it be COINTELPRO or what have you. But it's about how we chose to deal with the oppression that we were dealing with, and make fun of it, and enjoy each other, and have a good time in the midst of all this craziness. Right. So, and it came out to be something very beautiful in most situations. Yes. And, of course, whenever you create something that has some beauty in it, there will be some things that aren't very beautiful. So hip-hop is all of that.
Yeah, that's a great, because I looked at it as being just that re-recreation of black folks again. We are the most creative people on earth. And so once the disco thing had phased out, we were ready for the next thing. And we always started. If you look at every movement in America, black folks have always started it, and somehow white folks do something that they want to go ahead and label their thing. So hip-hop was that next black move. And it was a thing that, we were still hip, and then we started with this music that about partying and being cool, and then started talking about the social conditions that we're in now, which Kwame already touched on. We still looked at having our own franchises. And that was a big deal. We had a lot of parents that went ahead and started working for the man. They said, we got the jobs now. And then we came through and we said, look, we don't want the jobs, we want the company. Right? And so that was the new deal. And so this hip-hop was about reestablishing our own ownership of culture. So we went back to the streets and started with the beats and built it back up. And then like Kwame said, as soon as the big fish finds out that this little fish is swimming fast again, he wants a piece of that. Sure. And so that's when hip-hop became negative, when it got to the point where it was about making money again. And then you had people that came in and started looking at, well, what's the fastest way to make money off of it? And you're always going to have some of the negative things that come out with people just want to make money.
Sure.
So that's where the negative came in, but it's always going to be about redefining our cultural selves, and that's the greatness
of it. the next level of that, and which is why Omar mentioned that somehow people outside of our community always seem to come in and capitalize off of what we're doing. But it's not somehow. They intentionally do it. It's an initiative that they have, and it's about if you're funding something, if you're funding something, you are going to be rewarded. And it's simple as that. If you pay for the circus, the clowns have to dress the way you want them to dress. And
but isn't hip hop? As a parent, so I'm past 40, and I have 20-year-old children and 17. Isn't it that the hip hop seems to me something that someone can not really steal from us, because it's something they can't sort of copy totally. So is this a sort of victory, like? They could copy all the other things, but hip-hop, I think that's so unique. That's like playing the talking drum, in my village in Nigeria, where a white man can play the talking drum, but we'll know that it's not an African.
Well, I think it's a victory in the sense that we're showing that no matter what happens to us, we're going to be the creative people that we were put on this earth to be. Victorious to me, I'm still looking at, okay, now when are we going to start creating new Motowns? You know, that kind of thing. You know, victory to me. And Kwame is going to look at it the same way. When do we start creating our own Black Hollywood? I mean, seriously, where we can have green-lighted projects, and Kwame can get funds for every play he wants to do. I can get funds for every book I want to do in the Black community.
So you see that happening? Do you see that going to?
On a small level. I mean, you talk about creativity, but I think what we're speaking of is creating the infrastructure to perpetuate the creativity by any means necessary. And that's what, you know, that's what the major publishing companies do. That's what they've been doing. That's what the Hollywood studios are doing. They're creating institutions and infrastructures to make sure that their creativity, their children, their sons and daughters can constantly have an outlet for it. And that's what we're talking about. And I think on a small level, with what we're doing with Black Words and with what Omar has done with Mars Productions, and there are hundreds of people who are doing that, there are still obstacles. And I think cross-platform, whatever genre you're dealing with, the major obstacle is distribution. And being able to make sure that your product, that your service, that your idea has maximum awareness and maximum access. And once we cross that bridge, then I think we're in a different ballpark.
I am very upset because our time is up. And I haven't even got started with you guys. So hopefully the producer will have you come back and do part 2. Now we've got to, because I got to hear more. I don't know about them, but I know they're interested. But we're so happy that you came. Glad that you came and shared with us. And viewers, I know you learned a lot like I have tonight. And so please tune in next time on Africa's Vision Network.
There are cosmic miracles, like a star being born, that we can only watch in awe. And then there are miracles right here on Earth that we can help make happen. A child drinking clean water in a village overseas where there never has been clean water. Desperately poor children going to school instead of just dreaming about going to school. Families growing up strong and healthy and freeing themselves from the grip of the world's cruelest poverty. Miracles made possible through an organization called Child Reach. Child Reach finds sponsors for needy children overseas and helps families and entire communities learn to help themselves. Call Child Reach at 1-800-328-2100. That's 1-800-328-2100. Why just watch a miracle when you can help make one happen?